Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guests' musings, explorations, processes, and experiences prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience, and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Jon Alexander. Jon is the author of Citizens, Why the Key to Fixing Everything is All of Us, a book that seeks to reframe the current moment as one of immense civic opportunity, rather than merely a time of crisis and collapse. In 2014, Jon co-founded the Citizenship Project, a strategy and innovation consultancy that aims to shift the dominant societal narrative from consumer to citizen. He is a fellow of the Young Foundation, a founding member of the OECD's Innovative Citizen Participation Network, a strategic advisor to DemocracyNext, and a member of the Leadership Council of the Democracy and Culture Foundation. Additionally, along the way, Jon has also represented Great Britain in rowing and triathlon. In this inspiring conversation, Jon shares his journey of building greater trust in himself and others, which has shaped his ideas about evolving from a consumer story to a citizen story. In this new narrative, we expand our self-interest, connection, and sense of belonging, embracing the uncertainty we all collectively face. We discuss the importance of stories over data, becoming who we want to be, reflection, and the immense satisfaction of being part of something bigger than ourselves. If you feel somewhat stuck and perhaps overwhelmed by the mounting sense of crises, and if you're looking to re-engage with a sense of agency and empowerment, this episode, along with Jon's journey, will give you much to contemplate as well as inspiration for action. Look, I really enjoyed this conversation with Jon. I think both his book and his project are pointing to really fundamental aspects of what is a good life for us all, not just individually, but collectively. And so I think you're going to take a lot from this conversation. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, all your reviews are greatly appreciated at this stage of my podcasting journey. Please check out the show notes below to see more of Jon's work and indeed his book. And also for ways of contacting me, whether that's to help you individually with your own self-inquiry, or indeed for building trust, communication, and relationships amongst teams or groups of people. And you can also check out the podcast newsletter, where I share my reflections on what these conversations you're listening to have evoked in me. So that's all I have to say this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 85th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Jon, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. After following your work for some time now, I'm very grateful to have you here, as I think the things that you're pointing to or exploring are kind of a fundamental part of what I perceive to be a good life. So thank you very much for your time today.
Not at all, mate. Very good to be here.
So as we've discussed, the first question that I ask is the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through?
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And as I've said, my answer is a little bit lateral, which is that I have a question that I sort of try and ask myself and encourage others to ask every day, which is actually the question I ended the book with, which is, what would you do in this time if you truly believed in yourself and in those around you? And maybe if I kind of riff off the why that matters to me a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Basically, I think in my work, I talk about this idea that I think we're living in the kind of the dying days of what I would describe as the consumer story, like a story of ourselves and our societies that says that the right thing to do is to pursue self-interest, that self-interest will add up to collective interest, and that's the best thing we can possibly do, and that's because we're as humans, we are by nature self-interested, and so all we can really possibly hope to do is channel that self-interest and make the best of it. And I kind of have I really have two beliefs about humanity. The first is actually I think that's not true. I believe quite passionately that we are citizens by nature. And what I mean by that is we are collaborative, creative, caring creatures who can and want to shape the world for the better if given the opportunities to do so. But the second belief I have, which sort of bridges between that apparent kind of naivety and what I hope is a decent way to understand the world is that we are also storytelling and story dwelling creatures. and we can't help but appeal to and work from the stories we live in to understand who to collaborate with, what to care about, what to create. And as I say, I think we've been stuck in this consumer story for a long time that actually tells us that the right thing to do is to consume. The right thing to do is to pursue self-interest. The best thing to do is not to collaborate with too many people, but to look out for ourselves. And we're doing that because we've actually constructed a society and a set of institutions and a set of norms that are rooted in the idea that that is the best thing we can possibly do. And so when I ask this question, what would you do in this time if you truly believed in yourself and those around you? I feel like that's a kind of a key, a gateway to a different and bigger idea of ourselves. And it's actually kind of quite a radical act to ask that question, like to ask of people, to say to people, like, believe in those around you, believe in yourself, like believe that you are and we are capable of facing the challenges of our time, and that we are capable of doing so if we do it together. And so yeah, so that's sort of what sits behind it. I think of it as a I love the Turkish writer Ecce Temelkuran, whose work I love. Talks about this idea that the belief in humanity isn't a sort of lonely hearts club. It's actually a kind of a very, like, it's the most serious kind of political task you can possibly take on. And I think there's some of that spirit in it as well.
What for you, or was this something innate within you, or was there a turning point in your own sense of trust in humanity?
There's definitely a turning point or two in my life. I mean, so I started my career working in the advertising industry, and really, like, so working at the coalface of what I'd call the consumer story, right? Like, and the the frame of that work, particularly as a planner, as a strategist in that world, is you're writing creative briefs, writing sort of advertising and marketing strategies that in which you're kind of indoctrinated to start from what is the want that you are meeting, what is the need, in inverted commas, firmly in inverted commas most of the time, and how do you meet the markets, the self-interest of the target audience, basically. And so your deep assumption is that people are by nature self-interested, and and actually, like, I've come to see consumerism, which in my mind I always see as like having a capital C and a hyphen between the R and the ism, um, as as basically a kind of species level self-hatred construct. Like, it's us really telling ourselves we're not good enough to face this moment, and I was within that story, and I think a big part of why I see it in this way is because I was so deep in it myself and inhabited it completely. And so for me, but it wasn't. I mean, I wouldn't say there wasn't a single kind of moment of like wake up one day and transformation, right? But there was a
You're
but
obviously,
there was a kind of ongoing inquiry of like, what are we doing to ourselves? Like, I remember my first boss described my job to me by saying, what you got to remember is the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day, and your job is to cut through that. You have to make yours the best. Like, for a while I was like, make mine the best, and then over time you're increasingly like, did he say 3,000? And then you're like, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers constantly? Like, what does that do to what we even think is possible?
it's almost like it keeps us separate from the point of trust with each other. Like, because if you can always purchase something to make yourself feel better, or if there's always something else to get, it stops us having to even kind of acknowledge that space of trust or that aspect of relationality between us.
I mean, I think that's really astute, actually, and it's really one of the darker aspects, I think, of some of the sort of technology development work that's going on around the world right now. Is there's this talk of a trustless society, as in, like, we've eliminated the need for trust because sort of blockchain based contracting and all this sort of stuff will mean that we don't have to trust anyone. And you're like, that's not a good thing. Like, what are you doing? But yeah, from within the story that we're living in, it kind of makes sense. Like from within that dominant story, it's just that dominant story is the problem.
Because when you say that, when you're constantly sending messages to people's self-interest, there is an aspect of self-interest in us, but it's only a part of us. If we were sending messages the whole time appealing to the things that make us collaborate and be in commune with each other, that seems like a rather fundamental
Yeah, I
piece to
mean,
it all.
some of where this thinking started from with me was I started playing with this idea of like expanded self-interest as opposed to enlightened self-interest. So enlightened self-interest is this logic that you're like, people do nice things because they ultimately it's in their self-interest. It strikes me as this kind of
Right.
what's the word, like kind of paroxysms or kind of contortions in order to rationalize positive behavior into selfishness. It's like we can't understand everything through the idea that humans are assholes, really. Like we'll find a way. And and it's like, no, they're just being nice, dude. Like what's like chill and for me this notion of like expanded self-interest was a way to sort of play with the notion that actually like I do something nice for Mark, like not because it's like in some way it kind of is actually an act of selfishness or because it's altruistic actually, but because like Mark and I have hung out for a while and I like his accent and we're kind of becoming mates and like and so when I do something
Yeah.
nice for Mark, I'm kind of doing something nice for me because I think of Mark as part of my self-interest as a friend and therefore there's a bond. And we did this one of my favorite, like really early on as I was sort of developing these ideas and these frames. Like I got out of advertising and went to work for the National Trust in the UK, and which is a big organisation, nature conservation and historic houses and looking after heritage and beauty. And we did this lovely campaign that I'm still super proud of called 50 Things to Do Before You're 11 3/4, that was about sort of getting kids to do stuff in nature. And the research that underpinned that campaign showed that if you develop a personal connection with nature by the age of 12, then you're more likely to exhibit pro-environmental behavior later in life. And so it's like, and so these 50 things, this den building and mud pie making and tree climbing and all this stuff are actually kind of acts of expanding your self-interest to include the natural world, as was sort of how I came to think about it. So yeah, and I think that for me is a better way to kind of understand. It's like the project of citizening, to use that word as a verb, is a sort of continual a continual exercise of self-interest, but one that refuses the kind of the boundaries of the self as they are in kind of modernist neoliberal thinking or whatever you want to call it.
For you, the sense of going along this journey in terms of just how like you experience the world or how you experience wider communities, could you kind of chart your kind of sense of almost like I guess felt experience of life as you've gone along this path? Like even just in terms of some of the things you're pointing to of even the ideas of trust
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
nature
yeah.
or whatever comes to mind.
The thing that immediately sprung into my brain was uh, one of the stories that I came across in the research for the book was what's been going on in Grimsby in northeast England over the last few years. There's a wonderful organisation called East Marsh United. That started with kind of litter picks a few years back and gradually evolved to the point where they were like, no, we're talking like in a really difficult place. Like the story goes that there was a dead dog in a bathtub on one of the houses on Rutland Street in the East Marsh in Grimsby for 3 weeks because the big problem really is absentee landlordism and because the house prices are so low and the neighbourhood is pretty tough. Like people buy these houses and then just leave them. And if they're not getting any rent, they don't really care. There's no real value to them. They're just trying to turn them over. And so no one could go in. The police wouldn't go in because they didn't really value the neighborhood either. And like when I went to visit for the first time, walked down Rutland Street, and like quite a few of the the houses are boarded up and like 4-letter words scrawled across the doorways and this kind of stuff. But what's going on there, like from within, like this organization, like I say, began with one guy going on, like, we don't need people to kind of give us grants to go and clear one street. I'm just going to go out tomorrow night. I'm going to clear one street. Anyone who comes will go for a brew. Like, and it grew, built momentum. A few months on, they started a fortnightly magazine called The Proud East Martian to kind of tell their own stories and build local pride. Then they started an arts festival, and then a few years on, they got to the point and made the connections to run a £500,000 community share offer, which is enough on Rutland Street to buy 10 of those houses, refit them using good local jobs, and then let them out as a social landlord, create a sustainable revenue stream for the rest of the organisation. And sorry, that's a bit of a tangent to the question you asked, but what immediately sprang into my head was going up and seeing Billy and Josie, the sort of couple at the heart of some of this work, the other day. And Billy's had a tough time, had a bit of a health scare and this kind of stuff, and just going up and coming out of the station at Cleethorpes and just being wrapped in this big bear hug, and then walking along and debating all of the ins and outs of all of it, with the CEO, with the Humber on our right, and then finding and it's just these, and finding Josie and the dog, and like being jumped on by this enormous freaking dog that was basically terrified me. But it's like it's this it's these like the human care and love in that just comes of like really understanding and meeting someone and relating to and understanding their care for their place. And I hold that in such stark contrast to the work of being an advertising planner, seeking to understand and exploit the desires of a target audience through data, through having reduced like huge cohorts of people to numbers and psychodynamics. And Cormac Russell, another sort of guy who works in a similar sort of space, one of the founders of what's called asset-based community development and sort of champions of that work. Cormac has this lovely thing about the distinction between data and stories, and he's like, data removes the humanity, and actually in so doing removes the power, like or claims the power. Those gathering data are claiming power, whereas those telling stories and inviting others to tell their own stories are actually building power, and building humanity. And I think that's that I in terms of the sort of felt experience of this work and the felt experience of my kind of journey through life, I think that's a huge part of it. I feel like I'm in some ways I'm doing the same thing, right? Like I'm still using creative skills and creative thinking to try and build a story of the world, to try and mobilize some kind of behavior or activity. But instead of doing it sort of for people or to people, like by understanding data, I'm trying to invite people into their own agency and like invite them to claim this space, rather than do it for them. And it feels like, particularly in those moments of like deep connection, it feels so human.
I absolutely love the fact that was what you pointed to, was just this kind of very vivid sense of a bear hug, a giant dog jumping up on top of you, albeit terrified, but still in the moment of it. But I think, and this is a big focus even of my work, either even with the podcast, but also outside of it. And it's, you point to data and you just dehumanize things. And there's also then this kind of dissonance between what we're told our lives are going to be once, even if it's consuming or even if it's a particular type of behavior versus how we actually feel and experience life. And just what you pointed to there, when I started this project, I did 100 interviews. Just they were always private. It was just for my own personal thing. And when I asked people to recall a moment of strong fulfillment, it was never anything to do with something that they had purchased. It wasn't even to do with their big career highlights. It was just a personal human moment, like you've just mentioned there. And I love how you're framing that in terms of what the data does when we strip out the human experience from the data, but that would be on the assumption that we're robots, or even in an economic sense that we're all rational consumers and things of this nature, and which doesn't make any sense either.
I think that's right, and I think like what I think is what I hope, or what I think is powerful about the work that and the story that I'm telling into the world, this idea of the consumer story, the citizen story, and also the subject story, that the sort of three stories I play with, is that it lets people see, naming those things kind of surfaces for people and lets them see the underlying logic that's shaping so much. And just as you were talking, I was thinking about I recently hosted Audrey Tang, who until recently was Taiwan's digital minister, and is a real kind of pioneer and quite profound presence in London for a few days, and did a few events and stuff. And one of the things Audrey talked about, one of the things we were talking about was what's going on in tech world, which I've already referred to. But Audrey has this lovely way of articulating where she talked about Silicon Valley and so forth are on this pathway to artificial general intelligence, AGI, as if like that sort of has to happen, like as if that there's an inexorable kind of tractor beam kind of pulling us towards it, because like that's just like, of course we're going to develop that, like that's what the market seems to want to happen, and that's what will create efficiency. No. And then you're like, well, no, actually, like all of the logic of that pursuit comes from within a story of ourselves that says that that's who we are. And she counters it, or sort of contrasts it with saying, well, what if we were to use the same kind of technologies but seek to develop what ACI instead of AGI, augmented collective intelligence, and so you're seeing the same world but through a completely different lens, right? That's what's going on with this. You're going, oh right, like if I think of myself and ourselves differently, I can engage with the same kind of the same watts, the same basic data points, the same objects, but reinfuse them with agency and humanity, and reinfuse myself with agency and intentionality, and go like, what world do we want to build, and how can we put technology in service of that, and how can and what might we then be able to do, because actually there's something super miraculous about tech in this moment, or could be, which is that we actually do have the potential to have the technologies that could allow us to really like genuinely involve everyone in decision making, in shaping our society, like that maybe hasn't been possible before. And then you start to go, well, maybe we've been trapped in the consumer story, because that, I don't know, maybe that was the best story we could build with the technology we had, and actually that was kind of better than the idea that the God-given few should rule us all and tell us all what to do, and maybe we were trapped in that because we were a bit limited as well, and so you stop being in a kind of in a mindset that everything is. You can retain the understanding that everything is in many ways falling apart, but save yourself from that by going, it's not humanity that's broken, it's the story that's broken. And if we
Right.
hold the faith in humanity, and we start to go, well, what if we breathe into a bigger, deeper version of ourselves, then we can build something else actually. And it's not too late. And I'm like, you and I are talking, I don't know how long you like when this goes out or whatever, but we're talking in the UK just the day after last night. August the 7th was supposed to be a huge kind of outpouring of rage and hate of the far right, with 100 rumored events planned all over the country. And what actually happened was people from all walks of life, all ages, nans against Nazis and little kids, and turning out on to form kind of protective barriers outside the places that were supposed to be kind of attacked. And in those moments you see the truth of who we really, really want to be. And you do, how, like, I feel like we all kind of, there's a sort of sense in the ether of a possibility that we can do this. Like, we're all right if we can. And then the challenge comes, I think, which is can those in positions of power and influence in our society see that possibility? Can they take their place in it by coming in behind it, by inviting us into our agency rather than seeking to do it for us? And that, I think, is, in the sort of macro scale of things, I think that, to me, that's the biggest challenge, because it's hard.
What do you see potentially as leading them to make that kind of invitation?
I mean, I think where we're trapped at the moment a little bit is in order to get to a position of power and authority in the existing system, you kind of have to position yourself as the answer to the questions. Like, in order to get elected, you have to make promises that you will fix it for people. And it takes a kind of really, really kind of quite profound awareness to then be able to reposition yourself, not as the solution, but as the question holder, as the inviter, rather than the answer provider. And I'm not blaming any individual. Like, I'm not casting aspersions on anyone, really. The dynamics are such that in the consumer story, though very few people are left in positions of genuine power, and they are framed as in service to the rest of us and doing it for the rest of us. And breaking out of that is very hard. And yet there is no other way, I don't believe. Like, unless we get everyone on the pitch, unless we go, like, there is no way of doing this and facing this. Like, if people hadn't come out and done that last night, like, the energy in this country would be very different. And like, we can't face climate. That's not going to be, climate change isn't going to be fixed for us by some technical innovation and some clever investment or anything. It's going to be faced, not fixed, and it's going to be faced by all of us kind of getting involved. And from a leadership perspective, what that's going to require is kind of quite, I think, quite a radical kind of honesty, but also a repositioning of kind of inviting people into agency. But I also think the world is hungry for that. Like, I think I can't help but believe right now that if someone in a position of leadership were to go, look, we're in really difficult place. Like, here's the facts. Like, we are a long way down this path, and not try to say I will fix it, but then to say the way we will face this best is if we get everyone involved. In fact, this is almost exactly what the Taiwanese president did at the outset of COVID, which they kind of crowdsourced their national. It's an amazing story, but the speech the president gave at the outset was like, "We don't know how to get through this. This is going to be tough, but we do know that we'll get through it best if everyone's involved." And you're like, that kind of leadership, I think I have this kind of deep belief that people would respond so powerfully to that. Like, we all kind of know that it's broken.
Oh, like, but this is the weird thing. I think even on a deeply in our cells or our bones, we know it's broken, irrespective of what we're being told at times. But we also just see so many trends and so many emergent things that that point to the fact that it's broken. I think you've touched on such an important point, though. It's this moving away from, and it kind of is inherent within the consumer story as well, that someone who doesn't even know you is telling they know how to fix your problems. Like, if you just get this or that, then your life will, you'll feel contentment, you'll feel whatever it may be. So there's this continuous idea that somebody has an answer. But like, I think the most wonderful kind of moments in life are when we kind of acknowledge we don't know something, and we pay witness to what emerges, like with an intention. But even I'm even thinking of moments in, I think I live in Berlin now. I remember at one point during COVID, Merkel said we're going to close down or we're going to have a lockdown for Easter, and then just said, "Look, I tried to rush this through. That was a mistake. We're not going to do it." And I just find I have so much respect anytime I see anyone in power just go, "Here's my idea. Oh, let's pull back." But you know what I mean? Like these are, like, when I think of moments in the last few years from leadership that I actually respect, these are the first things that come to mind, where someone just acknowledges, or they don't have just this fixed plan ahead of time. They're willing to experiment again, investigate, collaborate maybe, and that involves changing plans. That involves changing as we get more data.
There's a lovely bit of theory that I go back to again and again, just to geek out on you briefly. It's
Please.
from family therapy originally. A guy called Barry Mason wrote a paper called "Towards Positions of Safe Uncertainty," and he
Okay.
distinguishes between safety and certainty. He says they're actually two different things, and we tend to elide them and kind of assume they're the same. And he draws a little 2x2 matrix. If you're listening to this, draw it out for yourself. Like safety at the top, uncertainty on the right, certainty on the left, unsafety at the bottom. And he goes, anyone who comes for therapy is in one of two places. They're either unsafe, uncertain, I don't know what to do, or they're unsafe, certain, I'm bad and I know I am. And he goes,
Right.
what we think we want, and my projection into this is what the consumer story tells us we want, is safe certainty. Tell me what to do to fix it. He has this lovely line. He says, but actually that doesn't exist. Like, solutions are only dilemmas that are less of a dilemma than the one we had before. and he says, the only thing you can actually do is create safe uncertainty. The only thing you can really do is go, like, we don't know. There is no right answer. And I'm here, I'm beside you, role of therapist side by side, not face to face. Like, project that onto leadership, project that onto all of these challenges. But we will hold the space together. We will find a way through. Like, and I am here, and that kind of, I think that speaks pretty powerfully to this kind of leadership I'm talking about, and to this openness to change that you're quite rightly, I think, bringing in. Is like, yeah, safe uncertainty, not safe certainty, as the space we need to be in. And like, in the world right now, like, we are facing crazy uncertain times, and I think it's all the more scary because of the lack of acknowledgement of that reality.
I think that's that sense of dissonance that people are, that can be almost even more like sometimes, even if we reflect on our own personal lives, sometimes just finding out that the bad news has come is actually a relief from this kind of perpetual cloud that hangs above us while somebody is telling us the sun is shining. Like, life is full of difficulties and challenges, but within that there can also be beautiful opportunities as well. And I don't know about you, but the sense of trust you were referring to even at the start, like, that seems to be so tied to this sense of safe uncertainty. Because I also get a sense, there's a kind of a deadening aspect to the humanity of us within the consumer story. Like, even you've just, that image or the story you shared of just meeting these people, like, and just that being a moment of connection. And that's what you remember, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Like, there's something within this where we're looking for safe certainty, but there's a call to adventure even within
Mm.
humans. Like, there's aspects of humanity that I think the consumer story doesn't get at all. And I think it's led to a kind of an atrophy or something of what connects us, even to the point that, like, what you're saying and what you're talking about is so bloody like it just makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like we live in communities. We know from our felt experience moments of either contributing to something bigger than ourselves, just being a part of a local community, how that makes us feel. And we're being asked kind of by the consumer story, I think, to forget that, which I think is, I don't know, there's something very dehumanizing about it. And it doesn't feel connected to the aliveness of life, if you get me.
100%. And do you know one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently, particularly again in the English context right now in particular, is one of the things I did in the research for the book was I went a little way, not too far, don't worry, but a little way into the QAnon conspiracy theory kind of world, into those spaces and lists and chat rooms and stuff. And what the reason I did that was because I went on a little bit of an instinct initially, but what I found was that the gateway into those spaces is, we need you here. Like, here's your first
Right.
task. Thank you for coming. Like, we can't give you anything, but we need your contribution. And isn't that so fascinating, right? Like, because these are people for the most part, and I like, we shouldn't generalize too much, but like for a large part, these are people who are otherwise talked about as sort of acting and voting against their economic self-interest, and this sort of, and assumed to be wanting to be served, and actually, like, I think I haven't quite kind of articulated this properly, like, this is at the edge of the thinking at the moment, but there's something like quite hard edged about the argument I feel I need to make in the world right now, which is that this isn't just like, when I'm sort of challenging leaders to invite people into agency, to create opportunities for contribution. I'm not just saying, like, this would be better. I'm not saying this is a nice to have. I'm actually going, unless you do this, those who would destroy our societies, those who would take us into the abyss, and they do exist, they will dress their actions up in these clothes. They will offer faux participation. They will offer belonging, and they will win, because that is what humans need. If you understand people as citizens, not just as consumers, you understand that actually belonging, agency, creative contribution are fundamental human needs, far more in many ways than food and TVs and whatever, like these material standards of living that we've sort of, the kind of, like, the sort of, it's the economy stupid signs like play to, like, that's bull, like, and that is exactly what is pushing people into the arms of the fascists and authoritarians, because they're the only ones offering them any sort of agency and contribution and belonging and possibility. And so I'm, yeah, that like, and I, like, what sparked that in me was your thing about adventure. Like, we need to be participants in this world. Like, we need to be shaping something, like,
Yeah.
and when you deny people the opportunity to do that, when you assume for them, you you're creating darkness.
What was it for you that just kind of gave you back the sense of not even agency, but like going back to your original question, like the trust in yourselves, or if you believed in yourself, if you believed in others? Because I think this is there can be some very competent people in this world that just don't trust themselves or don't trust others, but there can be still ways to get ahead in this society, or to move yourself on. Like, what what gave you a sense of, okay, now I not only trust myself, but there's an expanding of that into trusting others?
I think, I mean, one of the vital spaces for me in my life was, I did this slightly crazy master's degree, which was it was structured as 8 weeks. It wasn't really a master's degree; it was basically group therapy. Um, it
Okay.
was structured as 2 years of over 2 years, 8 1 week intensive workshops every 3 months, and partly it was and this was, I started, and it was called a Masters in Responsibility in Business Practice. And it was kind of, allegedly, it was sort of to help you integrate sustainability into your professional life. And then so some of this started for me with kind of climate and trying to work out how to do green advertising originally, and then this course kind of created the space to go, oh, I see, it's not about that, is it? And this sort of a combination of the cohort, but also this remarkable human called Chris Seeley, who was a tutor on this course, and I may well start to up. She died a few years back, and never really got the chance to tell her how important she'd been. But there are always these people, right? And I think, yeah, I remember one right at the beginning of the course, the first workshop of this course. At the end of the week, we were doing this collaging or something ridiculous, and I was like, this is like preppy ad boy who wins awards, right, doing this thing. And I was like, what are we doing? Like, what are you talking about? And I remember sort of getting quite hot up and saying to Chris, what I do in my life, because look, I've every privilege in the book for those who can't see me or can't tell from the posh voice. Like, I'm 6 foot, athletic, posh boy, straight, white, everything, right? And I said to Chris, what I've done in my life is I figure out what the rules are, I play by them, and I win because I'm generally pretty good at stuff. And she just looked at me with this kind of mischievous face, and she was like, what if the rules are wrong? And I was like, uh-oh. Mind blown. And I remember kind of bursting into tears or something equally hilarious. And just and I guess that so a big part of it was which is an odd way to answer a question like when did you learn to trust yourself? But I think that was the beginning of it, really, was to go, oh, hang on, maybe my instincts and my intuitions that I haven't really listened to are valid, and actually, I can, maybe we are trapped in a story. Maybe there's something going on here that we can kind of decode a little bit. And being in that space, if like I say, the sort of the duration of that space, the rhythm of it, the kind of coming back in and out, I think was the cycles of kind of action and reflection, I think are really important to be able to not try and flip some kind of switch and transform everything overnight, but also not let yourself, or myself, not to project onto others, but not let myself kind of go back to sleep, to keep kind of coming back to the well, or keep your hand in the flame, or whatever metaphor you choose, and yeah, and as I stayed in that space and kept asking the questions, came back to that 3,000 a day, what are we doing to ourselves? What might that be doing? How might that be manifesting? Who's thinking in similar ways that I can bounce off and learn from? And then starting to experiment positively with another story, and this sort of what does it look like when you invite people into their agency as citizens, and seeing people come alive in that. And then
yeah.
and it starts very small, I'm trying to remember, I did little experiments, uh, running events in the woods with a few mates, and just sort of chat without a particular aim, and just sort of chatting about what it was like to do sport without a kind of a win in mind or whatever, and just simple explorations of a different kind of way of relating to what we were doing, and yeah, just feeling a different kind of life, and then trusting that feeling. I don't know, I don't feel like I can chart a particularly satisfying kind of moment, but yeah.
To me that sounds kind of very thorough in a way, in the sense of, you come into contact with this space. Well, not only is someone just willing to question your story that you're holding already, but even in the space to, if you say you cried, or even whatever, even the idea that these were almost like therapy circles, I think that there's so much that's predicated on the fact that we don't have time to reflect. And even when you mentioned 3,000 images, when you were back in when you were quoted that idea of 3,000 images, God only knows what it is now. And it seems like the system at present, it's kind of like a game of musical chairs, and the music is perpetually playing. And it's only kind of when it stops that you get a chance, or there's either a space created or the music is stopped where you can kind of reflect maybe even more widely and just go, what exactly are we
Mm.
doing here? And I think those things become a little bit inevitable when there is space. And that's why I think with social media, it's, as you say, like our technology, it can be our greatest ally, or it can be our biggest enemy in all of this, because that's even more invasive, I guess, into people's lives.
Yeah, it's like I would say that the challenge isn't social media, it's the consumer story out of which the social media comes, and like, but it and
Completely.
therefore, but what social media does is it intensifies the presence of a story in our lives, and so when, yeah, but I don't know, it's interesting though, isn't it? Like, is it inevitable when the space is made? Maybe, but then COVID created a space. I mean, Arundhati Roy had that beautiful thing about the pandemic as a portal, right?
Hmm.
And so I think, and yet back to uh, back to usual, and like there's something about what in my mind, what I find, like, I think there's something about how we kind of have to start building so that when the space comes again, when at a macro level we're ready to see it. Like, this is the, I mean, in a way, I think that this moment in the UK right now, in England in particular right now, could again be a portal. Like, we saw and felt it, the people on the streets of Bristol and Newcastle and Sunderland, and like, saw and felt a different idea of one another last night. And if they could have, if that, this is why I'm like, I've been like railing on social media to to that note of like, Keir Starmer, come out and say something, dude. Like, celebrate that. Like, invite us into it. What a
Yeah.
gift. And he's not doing. And I'm like, like, how do we like, and so what is it to try and design and build and be ready for when those moments come, so that they don't pass, right? Like, I mean, this
Yeah.
again is why Taiwan fascinates me so much, because what happened there was the government basically like, all over the world when COVID first hit, you had mutual aid groups and street WhatsApp groups, and in the UK we had this NHS first responder scheme that was set up for 250,000 people to sign up in 3 weeks, and 750,000 signed up in 36 hours and crashed the thing, and then they've never got us to do anything. But the point being, like, this response is always what happens. Always. Like, when
Yeah.
the riots first happened, I was like, I bet you tomorrow morning there's going to be people out in every one of those towns putting it back together, and they will be far more than the people who are destroying. And that's not because I'm some sort of genius, right? Like, it's because it's who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we don't seem to have the story available, the structures, the responses, to be able to sort of to scaffold that and to start building again from it. And so I see the challenge isn't just a part of the challenge is to create those moments of peace and space, and it's certainly in our individual lives, but there's more as well.
Oh, absolutely. I do see lots more, and maybe there's a groundswell of it occurring where there's just going to be lots more people either looking to provide the space, hold the space, but do it in community. I think there's been this kind of evolution of even our spiritual ideas getting caught up in the self-development
Mm,
lens, which is very much still part of the consumer story. And even so, people meditating on their own without that leading to some sense of community or contact with others or change in a wider sense. I think there's a lot of holes to be poked at in that sense, but I really do see I don't know. It's interesting when you mentioned even social media coming from the consumer story and just how that doesn't. It almost puts us in a space of comparison and therefore competition, because the consumer story doesn't allow, especially in kind of when supercharged by social media, it doesn't allow for imperfection that much, or it doesn't allow for problems to exist. And even just when we have more of these spaces where we can connect or even see the real humanity, I think that's where we realize that's where we're more comfortable in coming together. And there's so many things. I don't know, like as you say, like just this response, like that is absolutely part of who we are as well. And then I think will be interesting. I don't know, just be interesting to see if we can what occurs. Like as you say, like COVID was a moment, but as you also mentioned in your own process, it's this
Yeah,
repeated coming towards this. Do you know, just one thing with the news story, because I find that like I used to work in finance. I used to, I had my own, journey of self inquiry that led to maybe changing things or leaving that behind. Um, but there's a real, for me, there's a real sense of in so much of the stories about what we have to change. It's about sacrifice. It's about you're going to have to give up this. You're not going to be able to fly. You're not going to be able to do that. For me personally, the level of relationships and the depth and the quality of relationships I have in my life, I wouldn't sell for anything. And I think a big part of the problem we have at the moment is just that we're not actually even we have so little like felt experience of some of the truly magnetic and kind of magnificent human experiences that they just kind of become like these platitudes like, oh, your health is your wealth, family is most important while you work 60 hours a week in the city. Do you know what I mean? Like, and there's an idea almost that if you buy someone a skiing holiday, well then that makes up for all the time that you're not around. These kind of things. I don't mean to be too harsh or judgmental with that, but to me, it seems that even the things you're pointing to, like collective action, community, we talk about an epidemic of loneliness, like in the citizen story, like, or even just this move to more collective action, it seems to be an antidote for much of the ills or the trends of dissatisfaction that we're experiencing. I don't know your thoughts just on even the optimistic side of it rather than, let's say, even the sacrifice
yeah,
of it, if you
totally.
know
I
what I
mean,
mean.
no, I love that. I think one of the things I sort of try and get across a lot is like, don't try and be a less bad. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, it's important to not fly, eat less meat, all of that good stuff. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not decrying individual behavior change, but a lot of that stuff, all of that stuff, really is just in the frame of being a slightly less bad consumer. And it's like, what, like,
yeah,
there's a very different thing about starting to sort of explore and discover agency as a citizen and finding the joy of that is so much more generative. Like, and one of my favorite it's a guy called Stephen Green, who uh, spent far too many years of his early life in the music scene in the US, and I think maybe taking a couple of quite questionable substances, but Stephen now founded this wonderful organisation called Rockcore, and they've just done a big thing in France in the run up to the Olympics, and their model they talk about. So in France is tu reçois, tu reçus, or something like that, and so it's give, get, given is the English translation, and basically the way it works is they put on an enormous like big celeb name gig. Uh, 13,000 people audience, and the only way to get a ticket for the gig is to do 4 hours of community action. And so
amazing.
and the really fascinating thing, and I won't get the data right, but it's something like this, like is like 90% of the people who do that have never done community action before, but 80% of them go on to do more after unrewarded. So and Stephen's got this lovely thing. He's like, he talks about citizenship as a muscle. It's a muscle you build,
Right.
not a cup you empty. And it's like, citizenship is a muscle, man, and when you start to use it, you kind of like it. Uh, but it's a lovely image, right? And it's right. It's like, so, and I think in many ways, I think rockcore is probably, well, and because it's collective as well, and you meet these people and you form this bond and then you go to the gig together and and you're like that as as a sort of environmental behavior change intervention, I think is multiple millions of times more effective than any one of those incremental changes, and so much more joyful. So it's like a lot of this work is like, how do we invite people into those opportunities to just start experiencing that citizen muscle, because we all have it. It's just that in the context of a consumer story being 3,000 times a day plus as you allude, I like the fact that you aged me a bit there. Like it's 2003, friends, 20 years ago. But like,
it's just the level of wisdom coming from you.
Nice try, buddy. Nice try. But yeah, there's me praising myself as being 6 foot and athletic, and straight back in your box, says Mark. No, but like that thing of like, what is it to find the joy of using that muscle that will have atrophied because we have been surrounded by this constant lullaby or like this song back to sleep that we're consumers, and everyone else is as well. And this, coming back to my question, I think that's like the interaction between what would you do if you believed in yourself and in those around you is really deliberate, right? Like, and really rooted in that experience of working in the advertising industry. Because what happened working in the advertising industry is that I lost belief in myself because I was losing belief in others. And to reclaim those things has to be a kind of a relationship between the two at the same time, I think.
Jon, between all what you've been saying, like from that opening question of what would you do if you trust yourself and trust others, to the idea of agency, collective action, coming into even that program or that campaign you ran at the National Trust of bringing people into contact, or kids into contact with nature, acknowledging so many kind of the pitfalls of this consumer story, but then also the what we could anticipate to experience from a citizen story, and giving the examples even in Taiwan of places that are doing things differently, and the agency that people, or the power that people are claiming as well along the way. Just really curious to get your sense of the question of what is a good life for you, Jon.
I forgot you did pre-warn me that this is the climactic question.
I have 2 strings to my bow.
Keep them both in mind. Come on here.
Yeah.
It's. I think it's this safe uncertainty thing, really. I think it is this life of. It's a spirit of adventure. It's a spirit of possibility. It's an opportunity to contribute. And it's the joy in relating. I don't have it's almost such a different question to the, like, it's not just that the answer's different to what it would be in a consumer story world, right? Like, it's a different question. It's almost like the noun has to be replaced by a verb, right? It's like, it shouldn't be what's a good life. It's like, what's good living. Yeah, I think I might just leave it there.
I honestly think that the joy of relating is the answer. If like, it just, even to the idea of us moving away from these kind of siloed existences. So no, the answer was more than thorough once again, and it resonates 100%. But I do think that it's, when experienced that, like, and really paid attention to, I think a lot of the desires or wants of anything else dissolve away, and not in some forced way, but I think there is a natural kind of
displaced rather than
yeah,
sacrificed. It's like,
completely. So look, Jon, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is Good Living
rebranded you as well. There you go.
yeah. God damn it. That was a good point. But no, I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the work you're doing. And thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely to be here, mate. Thank you.